While the city of Mississauga, formerly known as Toronto Township, has some connections to the War of 1812 in the form of past residents who served as militiamen during the war, largely along the Niagara frontier, no battles or events of note took place within the modern boundaries of the city of Mississauga during the war. To the east, in York, now the city of Toronto, Fort York was captured and destroyed by American forces in 1813. Fort York was rebuilt in 1814 and stands today as a National Historic Site in Canada. To the south and west, conflict neared our borders as invading American forces were repelled and engagements ranging from Stony Creek to Burlington Bay. Many of these pitched engagements involved the volunteer militia, which included people who lived in historic Mississauga.
War is a difficult thing for many men. It demands much, but gives little in return. My duty as captain, beyond that of raising the unit, is to keep the men's spirits up. This is a challenge when faced with such mundane tasks that day-to-day duties require. The greatest challenge of any militia unit is keeping the men from boredom on the front lines. Many simply choose to return home when they feel they're no longer needed. They must be reminded of their duties and must be kept primed to face the enemy. And in this way only, will we defeat the enemy. As such, I travel with the flag on my heart, in my hand, on the sword. And this is how we shall be victorious. This is how we shall be victorious.
Over 50 people who lived or owned land in historic Mississauga served with the militia during the War of 1812. Some were present and participated in some of the major battles during the war, including battles at Chippewa, Burlington Heights, Fort Detroit, Fort Erie, Fort George, Lundy's Lane, Queenston Heights, St. David's, Stony Creek, and others. Most often their service was less glamorous, but no less important to the war effort, namely in the transport of goods and materials and supplies, garrison duty, and road maintenance. Although some were involved in hostilities. Some were wounded, some captured, some deserted, and 2 never returned home.
Well, it's finally happened. The war has started. My father-in-law Thomas just headed out for the heights of Burlington this morning. He's taken his 2 sons Thomas and Daniel with him, and I'm expected to be there myself in 3 days. I don't know what I'm going to do for my wife Elizabeth. I guess I'm just going to have to send her off to be with her mother down the road. And in the meantime, this house is empty. I guess the only thing I have going for me are my 2 nephews. Amos is 15 and Duncan is 12, so at least they're old enough to know how to run the farm. But then again, they have their own farm to take care of. I can only hope they can find the time to check in on my farm.
Bradley?
Yes, sir.
It's time to go.
Yes, sir.
The war pulled families apart and stressed the very fabric of society. Loyalties were questioned, and the rhythm of normal, day-to-day life was completely disrupted. The threat of war and the uncertainty over the fate of those who would serve away from home would have been very stressful. As men were called for service, they were forced to say goodbye to their wives, children, and families. In some cases, fathers and sons served in the militia together. News traveled slowly, and families often went weeks and months without word of their loved ones. Those left behind were responsible for the care of property and family. It fell to the women of the community to take charge, to hold families together, and to persevere through the enormous challenges to manage the farm and home alone during the war.
My husband has been called to the front line of duty. And in my situation with a baby on the way, he insisted I go stay with my family. But I can't leave our farm unattended for so long. And what if he's in harm's way? And what if the baby comes while he's gone? Will he come home? The news has stories that the battles are raging and our men are dying. Our men have a sworn duty to serve, but we women have just as much of a duty to persevere, to have strength in our faith that this war will end and our men come home safe. We all pray for that.
The American strategy in the War of 1812 was to attack Quebec. If they could capture Quebec, then everything in Upper Canada would be cut off from supplies and manpower, and that would be the end of the war. Unfortunately, they never felt they had the necessary strength to mount the attacks, so they continued to fight in Upper Canada, in the Niagara Peninsula, and the Detroit frontier. And these battles actually, although many were bloody and hard fought, didn't ever give the Americans the opportunity to capture Canada. So, for example, the first attack at Queenston Heights in October of 1812 was an American defeat. This was where they were heavily dependent upon militia, which was a mistake. They refused to cross the river. Later on, as they became more professional, the Battle of Lundy's Lane, for example, was a much, much harder fought battle, really a draw, with both sides losing about 1,000 men. The Americans in that campaign crossed the river, captured Fort Erie, which was very, very weakly defended, and basically surrendered without a fight. But all these battles in the Niagara Peninsula really achieved nothing. At the end of each campaign season, everybody was back to status quo pretty much. And that the only really effective attack would have been against Quebec, and those two battles at Chrysler's Farm and Chateauguay were both humiliating American defeats.
Sometimes, as a captain of militiamen, you are forced to take to the field and lead your men into battle. It's a nasty affair. The decisions that you make may lead to life or death of yourself and those who follow you. But victory is elusive to those who don't take chances. War favors the aggressor. And as Major General Brock often declared, the best defense is a sharp offensive action. Duty requires those in command to make such sharp decisions, to follow orders, and demand the discipline of those that follow you. The defense of the crown, this land, and the flag requires no less.
A key component on the British attempt to withstand American invasion attempts was alliances with Native people. During the War of 1812, First Nation warriors and Métis fighters were significant in the defense of British territory. Native alliances were often accompanied or led by officers from the Indian Department who could assist in the communications between Native chiefs and British military commanders. There were many Native nations who allied themselves to the British Crown during the war, including the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Historical record states that many Mississaugas served as messengers, carrying communications over long distances, while others participated in several of the conflicts, both individually and as part of larger war groups.
The Mississaugas will do our part. The war dance has already begun, and we're prepared. John Cameron is leading our warriors to the mighty falls of Niagara to join with John Norton and the Grand River Warriors. From the Credit River, James Cheechak, William Herkimer, Lawrence Herkimer, and Joseph Sawyer have already joined the fight, and I will soon follow.
On Christmas Eve of 1814, in Ghent, Belgium, the Treaty of Ghent was signed between Great Britain and the United States of America, bringing an end to the conflict. The peace treaty stated that each side would return to a state of status quo antebellum, that is, the exact same state of affairs prior to the war. The First Nations people and Canadian colonists were not directly represented in the negotiations. The British Crown had pledged to secure a territory in the Midwest for First Nations peoples. But this promise was not upheld during the peace negotiations in the face of American opposition. It took several weeks for news of the treaty to cross the ocean, and war continued into the early months of 1815 before peace was formally declared in North America.
The legacy of the War of 1812 is an interesting one. It's a war, first of all, that the United States claimed to have won, Canada claimed to have won, and the country that was happiest of all was Great Britain, that didn't even remember the war happened. Immediately after the war, there was a mythology in both the United States and Canada. In Canada, the initial mythology was to, first of all, idolize heroes like Brock and build a monument to him. The current monument that stands at Queenston is in fact the second one. There was one built earlier that was destroyed. The most enduring myth at the time was the myth that the militia had saved Canada. The militia did their part, but in fact it was a combination of the militia, British regulars, and native allies that were effective in the defense of the country. And so it's like all things. There's a mythology that is part truth, part fiction, and it's part of the greater remembrance of the events of the war.
The War of 1812 shaped the lives of people who lived through it, regardless of whether they were a soldier, volunteer militiaman, native ally, or citizen. In 2012, during the bicentennial of the War of 1812, an enactment dubbed the Battle of the Credit came to Mississauga in Streetsville to help share this remarkable story and to honor and remember those who served and endured the war from historic Mississauga.